Hello, everyone, and welcome. Will here.
And Spencer, as
today,
usual.
Yeah. Today we're outside and live in person on the video. And we are going to finish our look at Ephesians chapter 2, picking up where we left off.
Finishing 2?
I think I hope so. I don't know.
Goal? Yeah.
We'll see. 11 through 22?
Okay.
I think we can make it.
Sure.
Let's do it.
All right. Ephesians 2:11. Therefore remember that formerly you, the Gentiles in the flesh, the so-called uncircumcision by the so-called circumcision in the flesh, made by hands, that you were at the time apart from Christ, alienated from the citizenship of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, not having hope, and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus you, the ones who once were far away, have become near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who made both one and broke down the dividing wall of the partition, the enmity in his flesh, invalidating the law of commandments in ordinances, that in order that he might create the two in himself into one new man, thus making peace, and might reconcile both in the one body to God through the cross, killing the enmity in himself. And coming, he proclaimed the good news of peace to you who were far away, and peace to the ones who were near. Because through him we both have access in one Spirit to the Father. Consequently, therefore, you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but you are fellow citizens in the saints and members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole building joined together grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are built up together into a dwelling place of God in the Spirit.
All right. Wow. There's a few things in there that hit me, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Okay.
I think about coming out of where we've been, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just to kind of recap a little bit.
Yeah.
We had Ephesians 1, which began 3 through 14, this song, this victory song of Jesus, right? And how he accomplished the plan that God had before the foundations of the world.
Yeah.
We have the Jews being a part of that predestination and plan, and then all of a sudden, and we have in verse 13, in him you also, Gentiles, have now been brought in to that plan.
Yeah. Yeah, in a lot of ways, I think this passage is actually kind of a summary of what we've already been talking about.
I was
a little bit more detail.
Yeah, I was thinking that, man, this really brings together that, like, if
maybe we kind of got ahead of ourselves a little bit.
If there was some question about who's the we's and the you's and and so we're talking about, this kind of clears that up. Mm-hmm. You're clearly discussing Jews and Gentiles here, and he's really going out of his way to articulate how the Gentiles are now just as much a part of the people of God as the Jews.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a few things that stick out to me. One, what did your translation say again in verse 16?
Okay, let's see.
Sorry, I put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. And might reconcile both in one body to God through the cross, killing the enmity in himself.
Yeah, mine's basically the same thing, except for thereby killing the hostility, which is the same thing.
Right.
So, but that phrasing of that, so reconcile us both, Jews and Gentiles, and then also reconcile us both to God in one body with God.
Yeah.
Therefore, killing the enmity or the hostility. And I realize
it's the whole thing.
It's the whole thing. It's not only. It's not only saying what Jesus has done at the cross, therefore removes the hostility between us and God, between me and God as an individual. Yeah. It also removes the hostility between me and other people who are also with God, so then we can be together, me and you, us and them, and all of that, and then also between us and them and God collectively. Like, it's everything. It's like there's just no more room to be at odds with each other.
Yeah.
Or to be at odds with God.
Right.
Why would we be?
Right. So, what kind of stuck out to me, I don't know how much we want to get into different aspects of this because there's a lot. And there's some big topics.
I love it. I love it when your sentences start. I'm not for sure how much of this we want to get into,
which is pretty much every week. Well, because we don't plan these out ahead of time, like what exactly we're going to talk about. Not really, anyways. So
we know we're talking about these verses.
Yeah. So who knows where this is going to go? But this is kind of the first hint of, in Ephesians, anyways, of Paul's relationship with the law, quote unquote.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Which is really, I would say, complicated and nuanced. It's not as cut and dry, I think, as we can make it. And I think there's a lot of kind of easy pitfalls along the way with some interpretation of what Paul is talking about with all of that.
Yeah.
That's kind of confusing.
I think that, again, not for sure how much of this we want to get into. But,
because he kind of only gets into it here in so much as it helps with the aspect of division.
Yes.
If you want more in-depth sort of this is what I actually think about the law, let's talk about it specifically.
Yeah.
That's more in Romans and Galatians and stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is really the time or place, but I don't know. That's just...
Well, Paul does something,
here.
or when Paul speaks about the law, he seems to speak about the law in its three forms, which I don't think we typically compartmentalize.
Yep.
And what I mean by that is Paul seems to separate out the moral law of God, like the things that God says are good for us to do in the ways in which we love one another and love Him and relate to one another and so forth. Sort of those moral laws. Paul continually seems to hold those up as still being binding on us, as still saying hey, these are things that you still should do.
Yeah.
But he also seems to compartmentalize the ceremonial law and those what maybe would be considered kind of those national boundary marker kind of laws, like circumcision, clean laws, issues of sideburns and with the type of clothing blends that you wear, those kind of odd laws. I say odd, but those distinctive laws that make the covenant people of God stand out in the crowd.
There's no need for them to stand out in the crowd anymore because they're all being united.
Because the whole crowd's welcomed in.
But and I think it's also easy. See, this is the trap I think that I've noticed as I've kind of started, and by no means am an expert on this whatsoever, but as I've kind of started to learn a little bit more about this, and kind of realize, I guess, some of the misconceptions that I've had about that, it's easy for me. And I think people in general, kind of in our culture, who don't really know much about the law and all the Levitical stuff.
Yeah.
It's it kind of comes across as, that was all legalism.
Right.
That legalism is bad.
Yeah.
Paul doesn't like that. Thank goodness we had Jesus to come die. So now that we don't have to do all those things to make God happy with us.
Well,
and that's not like...
And I think there's
kind of one of those half-truth things.
Right. Well, there's another thing that gets said a lot as well, which is that, I think especially when you start discussing the sexual laws, is you get a lot of. I've gotten pushback before, and the argument is something to the effect of, you eat pork, so why would you still follow an Old Testament law about sexuality, or why do you still why would sex before marriage or same-sex relationships, why would those laws have any bearing on your life if you're still, eating lobster?
Yeah.
It's hypocritical to follow one law but not the other.
Yeah.
And I totally get that. And if the law wasn't compartmentalized in itself, that totally makes sense. Paul seems to make the distinction. The third category of law is really judicial law, which is really only applicable inside the context of a nation state or a theocracy, right?
Yeah.
So what we have, it seems like what Paul's saying here is that maybe I'm wrong, and I'm willing to be, but verse 15, by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create himself one new man in place of the two, so making peace, and might reconcile us both to God. To me, that it feels like he's discussing the ceremonial kind of national boundary marker laws. They're not abolishing the law of love your neighbor.
Yeah.
I think that he's maybe I'm wrong, but I
think it is that. I think also what it is kind of what he talks about in other letters that he wrote about the fact that the law in and of itself was good. Yeah. But it became corrupt, and instead of being a thing that made Israel stand out as a light to the nations to bring people in and renew all of creation,
Right.
it became a source of you're not in.
Right. Well,
it kind of did the opposite of what it was supposed to do.
Right.
And that's also what Paul doesn't like about the law and why it became why it was a source of hostility. Right. And so another thing.
Well, he mentions circumcision.
And so
objectively, but
so in this translation, all of it's kind of weird. But I don't know about you, but whenever I read, this is kind of just like a helpful Bible tip I've learned in general. Whenever I read Ephesians, or this chapter specifically, the phrase that jumps out to me is the dividing wall of hostility. Like that just pops big time.
Yeah, that's the way it's translated in the ESV as well.
And so what I've kind of been learning to do, Tim Mackey from the Bible Project talks about this, whenever you see like a really particularly odd phrase, like even more odd than the rest of what's in the Bible, either it's kind of like a big glaring hint for you to go look it up somewhere else in the Bible, probably the Old Testament, and find out the context because it's most likely a deliberate link, or it's something probably from cultural context that we don't understand. So it's one of those two things. So that phrase pops to me big time.
The dividing wall of hostility.
And I know that there's some interpretation that it's like it's just some sort of metaphor, which either way it is. But I think also it might be in reference. I think there was a literal wall for the temple as well.
Oh, okay.
Right. Dividing Gentile and Jew. Like this is so far as you can get into the temple if you aren't a Jew.
Yeah.
And I think I can't remember where it was that I looked at this. So this probably isn't helpful because I'm not going to be able to find it whatsoever. But I'm pretty sure there was some sort of dividing wall in the temple, and Paul is probably very pointedly making an image of that as well.
Well, you see, what you're saying is he's probably appealing. Of course, it's a figure of speech, but you think he may be appealing.
It might have been an actual literal wall.
Yeah, that's something that culturally they actually had some sort of experiential reference for.
Yes, which doesn't invalidate the metaphor. It makes it stronger because there was a literal dividing wall. Right. I mean, I think that reinforces the point more.
Right. But it seems like he's clearly making a statement about the law that would establish these and explicitly mentioning circumcision, those things that would say, hey, this covenant people is in these people because they don't have these outward signs or not in.
Yeah.
He's saying all those outward stuff, that's all been abolished because Jesus now is your peace. So I think back to something that we said before, which is that idea of what issue is so big that I'd be willing to hold on for all eternity, and hold against somebody or whatever else. And when I think about this idea of removing that wall of hostility, right? Removing or as killing the hostility or the enmity between me and other people and me and God. The first thing I think about is regarding other people, and I think about my own life, and I have to take a step back and say, do I have any sort of hostility, bitterness against anybody else? Where does that come from? What gives me the right to think I can hold on to that? And I think about what it says is through the cross that all has been dealt with, right?
Yeah.
So what is it about the cross? I mean, we can say that. We can say the cross kills the hostility. Yeah. But what is it specifically about either the hostility or the cross or both that the cross takes care of the hostility? And is it proactive in that because now I'm resting at the cross, I won't become hostile anymore? But it also seems to be retroactive. Like there was hostility that I was carrying, and now because I'm living in light of the cross, that's killed. So what is it about hostility that gets resolved by the cross?
So I think it's both of those things. That it is proactive in the sense that it killed the enmity, and it's retroactive in the sense that. Yeah. So I think it's both of those things. And I think the reason for that is that it sets everybody, kind of what Paul says earlier in Romans. Like it sets everybody on the same level playing field, right? As far as the people who are part of Israel in the covenant family, who shouldn't have needed the cross, but they did anyways, right?
Right.
And outsiders who weren't in, right? it puts everybody in the same need of grace. That I think when you look at somebody who is really, I don't know, it's really messed up. When you realize your own level of messed up, then you think, well, how can I feel hostility towards them because of how much I needed saving as well, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of that hostility comes from a place of maybe not fully embracing your own need.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not to say that, I mean, because we all do that like all the time, but so it's not like something that just is completely gone forever.
Right.
But I don't know.
I was talking to someone this morning about something very similar to this, a little bit different, but I think it's basically the same conversation. The question was, this morning we were talking about idols, and what, and idols are tricky because they're the things that we kind of do or use to make ourselves feel okay, right? And we trade that truth of being made okay through the cross and being made okay through this other way that I can control. But I think that any time I've ever been hostile or bitter or at odds with somebody, in a way that I would describe as somewhat hostile, or I've ever felt anyone hostile toward me, it's always in the context. If I'm hostile, I feel like I'm right. I'm in the right.
Yeah. Or one of your idols is being tampered with.
Well, yeah, that's true. But the thing that makes me right, like if I lose this, I won't be right anymore.
Yeah.
Right. It's all about me being okay and me being right. And I remember there was this woman that I used to work with. I did a temp job one time. Yeah, here we go. There was this temp job I did where I did telemarketing.
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
No.
Few people.
You were a telemarketer?
For about 2 months. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Here's the thing I learned about telemarketers. They never think they're wrong, right?
Yeah.
I never met one person that I work with who had been there for any length of time who ever felt like, I never heard anyone apologize to anybody.
Yeah.
I never heard anyone say, wow, I really dropped the ball on that. It was always someone else's fault. It was never their fault. And
sounds like you would fit right in.
Me? Yeah. It's my ilk.
Yeah.
But no, so I felt like everyone had a bit of a chip on their shoulder, right? And everyone felt like they were in the right, although they constantly complained about other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of got to the point where it felt like everybody, if you hear them talk, they project themselves. I realized, like, I was talking to this one woman, and I was like, what is it about the way she describes her life that I can't quite put my finger on? And one day I realized that she is both describing herself as a superhero and a victim at the same time.
Yeah.
Like she's invincible, but yet she's completely at the mercy of everyone else's mistakes.
Right.
And this superhero victim.
Yeah. Well, that's so interesting. I've worked with people like that too. It's
Yeah.
like, I'm the only one who can do anything right.
Yeah.
It sucks so bad to be me because everybody else is wrong all the time. Woe is me. I'm so perfect. Like
Right.
it's this weird sort of
Right. But she was one of the most hostile people I'd ever worked with in my life.
Yeah.
And to me, the source of that hostility, I mean, she maybe was in a more of an exaggerated case study, but the source of that hostility to me seemed like the fact that she never felt like she was in the wrong.
Yeah.
She felt like she was in the right. And I realized that this hostility that Paul's talking about is because one group feels like they're right with God and the other group
It's a
is
bit
kind of
more
on
of
the
like an
outside.
ethnically racial sort of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
But I think there's significance beyond that, right?
Yeah.
But I think that if you just take God out of it for a second, which I don't mean that like in a negative way. I
Yeah.
just mean that a lot of people, and myself as well, like, it's not about being right with God. It's about just being okay and being right, being in the right, which is sort of sort of, I don't know, metaphysically right with God, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
Sort of existentially right with God. But I mean, like, I feel like I was right. I was in the right. They were in the wrong, and therefore I have a right to be upset and mad
Right.
and hostile.
Well, what you're describing is kind of the way Tim Keller describes righteousness.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
Or it's like what you said, I think, in a sermon one time, a long time ago, about like what is the thing that you use that makes you, or that reminds you that you're not a bum? Like to tell
Right.
myself that I'm not a bum.
Yeah.
That I
This
have
is what I
purpose.
do.
This is what I do.
This is
This
what
is
I
my thing.
do, and I feel like I'm not a bum.
And for a lot of these people, while it is kind of a more like ethnic sort of national pride almost, it's like this is what makes me okay. It's these
Right.
laws, and it's this, it's these ritual cleansings and these feasts and festivals and everything. It's all of that,
Right. The law of ordinances.
and it's
yeah.
not those things in themselves that are bad. And it's not like Paul probably even stopped doing all of them. I don't think. I mean,
Yeah.
these things were
Don't
like
seem to be.
engraved. Like every cell in that man's body was like synced in with like the Sabbath cycle. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
not like he.
Yeah.
You know, but the hostility and the pride that it creates, or the sense of okayness without God in the picture that it could possibly
Yeah, I think
result
that,
in.
that's
I
really
think
what
that's the
What an
problem.
idol is you remove God and you still try to find a path to feeling okay and right,
Yeah.
and like I'm not a bum. And for this woman I work with, it was everything. Because it was how many calls she made, or I mean, it was. I remember, she called someone at home, and they, like someone was like, doing something and they didn't want to talk, and she, of course, just like would blame them, like, well, it's not me calling in the middle of dinner, that's
Yeah.
the problem. Clearly, that
Who eats
person
dinner
is
at
just
that
a
time
jerk.
anyways, yeah.
Why did that jerk hang up on me? Then the nerve of some people.
Yeah.
But I realize that we all have that operating at some level, right? This idea of I'm right in these things, and therefore I'm okay. And one of two things happen, as you said. The thing that makes me okay gets threatened, and that makes me hostile to people who may be taking away what makes me okay.
Yeah.
And then the other side is just that I feel like I'm okay, and they don't do those things, or they don't live that way, or they don't whatever.
Yeah.
So therefore they're not okay, and I just feel naturally better than them. And I think what Paul's gone out of his way to show is that what actually makes you okay, you can never lose with the perfect tense salvation again,
Yeah.
right? So you don't
Yeah.
have to worry about it being threatened by anything or anybody else.
Yeah.
So that hostility is gone. There's no need to be hostile there. And the thing that actually makes you okay is not, well, it's not about you for one thing, but it's also shared among many people. And so you can't lose it. So therefore, a threat to it is no real threat. And
Yeah, the biggest threat is death. And
right.
So what?
Yeah, that
you know?
doesn't hurt. And then you have the other source of hostility, which is that I feel better off than somebody because I'm right and they're not. Because I've done these things. And what Paul says back in chapter 2 is that. Would you see the high places?
Take your time.
I'll take my time. Where does it say? This is not your own doing; it is the gift of God, right? So what actually?
The famous one.
The famous one, the one that I. But that's the point, right?
Yeah.
So the two sources of hostility. I may be minimizing this too far, but to me it feels like the people that I know and myself, when I've been the most hostile, it's been one of two things. One, the thing that I think makes me right is being threatened, or two, I think that I do something, or I am something, or whatever. Something is true of me that is not true of somebody else that makes me better than them.
Yeah.
And I own that, and therefore I have this chip on my shoulder toward those people.
And then whenever somebody else comes along and does that thing that you think you do the best, and they do it better than you, then you get really angry.
Oh, that's true. That's true. But so there's that. That's the tension, right?
Mm-hmm.
I do this thing, and therefore I'm better, and therefore I have that's a source of hostility, or a source of looking down on, or whatever. Or what I think makes me okay is being threatened. Paul's gone out of his way to say this is nothing you did, so you can't look at yourself as being better than somebody else. And this is something that has been done for you, been given to you, and you can't, and you're not gonna lose it. And so therefore there's no risk there's no need to be hostile, because what really makes you okay can never really be threatened. And I think that's true of between people. but then it also translates between us and God, because now because every other source of what makes me right, I had to seek away from God because I couldn't be right with God. But the cross has made a way for me to be right with him, which is what I'm ultimately looking for in everything else. And it's being involved in everything else which created hostility in my relationship with him.
Right.
So the cross resolves it all.
Yeah. Okay, so last couple of verses here, kind of wrapping things up, because your battery on your laptop's getting low, and also we've probably been talking for almost a half hour now, so it's getting that time. So Paul kind of moves on, and towards the end, he starts talking about Christ being the cornerstone, in whom the whole building joined together grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are built up together into a dwelling place of God in the Spirit. I could talk about this for a long time because it's awesome, but I won't do that.
What excites you about this?
Oh, I don't know. I just like the temple stuff. I think it's cool.
Yeah.
I like it, and I like that theme and seeing it trace through the whole Bible.
Yeah.
So just kind of seeing it reach its culmination in the New Testament's just exciting to me.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just it. But I think it's a good image. There's something. It's comforting.
Yeah.
There's something that I just like about it.
Right.
It reminds me of that C.S. Lewis quote. I think it's a C.S. You would know about like Jesus coming in and beginning to build the house, and he's like, it looks like he's wrecking things around, but then you realize that he's not just he's building a very different house than what you thought of, and he's building it for himself to come dwell in. Like that's what comes into my mind with this. So maybe I'm kind of linking the C.S. Lewisness to these couple verses, and that makes me really resonate with them. I don't know, but
yeah. You know, I have a C.S. Lewis study Bible. Did I tell you this?
No.
So there's
Not
two,
anymore, you don't. I'm taking it on
There's
my way
two
home.
ways that I get my C.S. Lewis quotes for sermons. One is I listen to the Tim Keller sermon on that passage because there's probably
There's
C.S.
probably
Lewis
one,
quote
or
in
like
there. But the other way, which is actually quite, I don't think this is cheating, but so I have a Bible called the C.S. Lewis Bible. And on every page, essentially, if there is any reference in any C.S. Lewis letter, book, published work, anywhere that either references the verse or a theme that is brought up in the verse,
It's there.
It puts all the citations in the footnotes and has it printed off. So
How much you want to bet?
I almost guarantee that it's probably connected to that.
There's we're already off track. There's I can't remember what translation it is, but there's a Spurgeon version of that out now for something. It might be the CSB, like that newish Christian Standard Bible thing. I think there's a Spurgeon version of that where it's just like
where it takes the excerpts from sermons
basically
and
like
so forth.
every single page, because he pretty much covered everything. So like almost every single page there's like some kind of Spurgeon sermon quote.
That's funny.
So if anybody wants to look into that, have fun. I just know it exists, but
yeah. What's frustrating to me though is when I'm reading a passage and I know C.S. Lewis mentioned something and the Bible doesn't have it listed, because I've come across that a few times.
Yeah.
But that's because I'm just a nerd.
You can
So
come out with the new revised
maybe
edition.
I'll revise
the new revised C.S. Lewis Bible.
Letter to the editor.
Yeah.
But one thing I think is interesting in this idea of cornerstone.
Yep.
Is the basically what the word is headstone.
Yeah.
Not like tombstone, but like headstone. Like it's the headstone. It's and there's the theme of head or being the head is actually something that was mentioned in chapter 1 for Jesus. It's now in chapter 2, this headstone, and then it comes up again later when it talks about the husbands and wives idea. But this idea of head in this context of headstone is I think when we think of head, we think in terms of hierarchy. We think of like Jesus up here, and then now we're like above or below,
Yeah.
And there's sort of the image of that in chapter 1, the idea of Jesus being head and everything being given. He's head over all things and given to the church, But he's now over all things, but with the church in an odd way that I think as Americans we tend to put like some sort of corporate structure to it.
Yeah.
But what Paul does here by putting Jesus as a headstone means that basically his stone is laid down first and sets the trajectory of what it looks like for all of us to lay our lives down right after that.
Right.
And then therefore build the wall of the temple for God to dwell.
Yeah.
And back to that Henry Nouwen quote, that idea of, the space within us and the space among us is the same space.
Yeah.
It's the space where God dwells, right? Oh, Nouwen. But that's what because we all.
There's a B.
Oh, there's a B. Be kind, B.
Pretend that wasn't there.
So, but I think
Let's get this going.
That's a unique thing for me. It sort of puts Jesus and our relationship with him in terms of, I lay my life down because he showed me what it looks like to lay our lives down. We love because he shows us what it looks like to love, right?
Yeah,
He shows us how to, he sets the trajectory for what it looks like to lay yourself down, which is a very different
It's
thought.
a reference to Psalm 118 as well.
Is
right?
it?
The stone that the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone.
Right. Yeah, that idea that...
Okay, I just didn't know that was Psalm 118. I didn't know where that was from.
But the idea of that headstone, that idea of Jesus being the head in less of a corporate sense and more of a laying down, and setting a trajectory.
In that sense, maybe headstone does kind of work.
Yeah, maybe so. But I find that's an image that I try to think about, especially as Paul begins to apply that later in terms of men and women, which we'll get to later. But
no.
Yeah, right. But what does it look like to lay our lives down in the trajectory of Christ? Right?
Yeah.
I think that's, and you can't do that if you're hostile.
No. No.
Yeah.
It's going to be there's going to be not the kind of temple that you want to be hanging out in.
No, that's not the temple you want to go to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that, and that idea of us being joined together, and that idea that it is a dwelling place for God by the Spirit, and that idea that back to that Nouwen idea that the space within us and the space among us is the same space that God's creating for himself to dwell.
Yeah.
And that is both humbling, encouraging, and I don't know. I guess it just gives me a foretaste of heaven, and that gives me peace.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be back next week, Lord willing, with chapter 3.
Yay.
We'll see you soon.